I'm going to show you the 4 ways that you can plumb an aquaponics system, all the way up to the hydroponics. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in just a second here. The very first system here is what I would call a media bed over a fish tank setup. You'll see this often online called chop and flip and stuff like that. And the reason they call it chop and flip is a lot of times you'll take an IBC tank like what is pictured here and cut the top of it off, flip it over, and that becomes your media bed. And that's okay as far as terminology goes, but it's a little bit misleading in a way because a lot of people are out there, you know, they're building like a little tote or a fish tank or, you know, one of those type of things. Even I've got something like this outside where where it's a really basic system that they want to set up and they're wondering how to build it. Well, all these systems are basically plumb the same. These chop and flips are media bed over a fish tank. You got your fish tank here, and the pump is sitting in the bottom of it. The water's pumped up into the media bed and then is returned back to the fish tank, usually using a siphon of some kind. Sometimes you'll see it on timers and a few things like that, but most of the time it's on a timer or on a siphon. So that's the simplest type of aquaponic system. The next one you'll see here is this is what's called a single loop aquaponic system. So what does that mean? Well, you have a sump tank and a fish tank. The fish tank has to be the highest point. The outlet of the fish tank needs to be the highest point in the system, and the water level of the sump needs to be the lowest point in the system. So that needs to be the lowest point. So how does this work? The water gets pumped up from the sump into the fish tank. The fish tank fills. The water goes out of the fish tank. And if you're adding extra filters into the system, the first filter that it goes into will be a solids removal filter. Now, the second filter is optional, but this would be if you had a large population of fish. The next filter that the solids filter would flow into would be an additional biofilter. Again, this one here is totally optional depending on what you're doing next. Step is the water is going to flow into the hydroponic part of the system. If you're using media beds, you might not need the biofilter, but if you're using deep water culture, if you're using NFT, if you're using Dutch buckets and stuff like that, then you're going to need this filter here. But anyway, it flows from these filters into the hydroponic system, and the hydroponic system, whatever hydroponic system you hook it up to, ends up flowing back to the sump tank. So a single loop, up and then back down. And this is all gravity fed, so each level needs to be at a slightly lower elevation. The water is constantly moving down using gravity. Advantage to this setup is simplicity. You don't need as big a pump as the next system in order to power the whole system, so it does use a little bit less energy. The disadvantage to a single loop is there's no way to separate the water or the fish from the hydroponics. So if you need to do some work on, say, one of these media beds and you had to shut off the water, well, you're shutting the water off for the whole system, and that could be a disadvantage. But it's also very easy to plumb and easy to understand. The next system we're going to talk about is what they call a dual loop aquaponic system. So basically it starts off the same. You have your pump in the sump tank, and the pump pumps the water up, but it goes to a T, right? And the part of the water goes off to the fish, and from the fish it goes into the filters. Now in this case, you probably really do want to make sure you have these type of filters in place. So the first one it's going to go into is a solids removal filter. The next one that it's going to go into is a biofilter, and then it's going to wind up in the sump tank. The biofilter is still optional, but it kind of depends on the next one. So anyway, the other loop goes to the hydroponic system, whether it be NFT, deep water culture, media beds, whatever it happens to be. So that goes to the hydroponics part of the system, and the hydroponic part of the system flows back to the sump. So what are the advantages of a system like this? One of the big advantages to one of these systems, a dual loop system, there's actually several of them. One of them is now this fish tank no longer has to be the highest point in the system, but it does have to be the highest point in the loop. So that's one loop. It goes up and around and returns back to the sump. And the second loop here goes to the hydroponic system and back to the sump. Some of the disadvantages are it's not as energy efficient because it does require a larger pump to handle both the fish tanks and the hydroponic side. But that's the other big advantage that it does have is it allows you to separate things a lot easier. So in other words, if you had to do some work on one of these grow beds over here, you don't have to shut the whole water system off. You could just shut off the hydroponic side, or just have a valve for each grow bed. Or if you had to do something with the fish, you could just shut off, the water going to the fish and leave the hydroponic running. So that is a dual loop. Now the last one is a system that you're just not going to run into very often. It's more of a commercial thing. You could build it in your backyard, and what it is what they call a decoupled aquaponic system, where the water doesn't return from the hydroponic side back to the fish. Instead, what it does is you have a fish side and you have a hydroponic side of the system, and in between here you have some digesters. And what does that mean? So how does this work? So the water gets pumped up from the sump tank into the fish tank, through the solids filter, through the biofilters, and back to here. And on this side, the water goes from here out to the hydroponic system and back. But how does the water go from the fish over to here? Well, what it is when you need water over here in the hydroponic side, what you do is you clean this filter out. You open up the valves, you flush the poop and stuff out of this filter into an anaerobic tank. So you have an anaerobic tank here that's digesting the fish poop. So it's digesting the fish poop, and when you flush this and it's filling up, now the cleanest water over here will be on the top. So it's going over here to this one, and now this one over here, this is an anaerobic digester. So you got an anaerobic digester and you have an aerobic digester. And this one has air running in it. So you flush this fills up, flows over, this is already full, this floods into this mineral-rich water into the hydroponic side, and the hydroponic side grows the plants. So that's a single directional aquaponic, decoupled aquaponic system. What are its advantages? Well, the big advantage is it's the most flexible type. It is also the most expensive to set up, and it is the most, it has the most moving parts, if you will. So, what its big advantages are is you can, really pH. pH is probably the biggest advantage here, because fish tend to like a little more alkaline type pH, 7.5, 8s even, and plants prefer the acidic pHs. So we can do some adjustments to pH to keep both the plants happy and keep the fish happy. The other thing that we can do is, by these systems not being connected with each other, if I happen to have to treat my fish or something, I can treat the fish and then I can flush the system, and then I'd not contaminate my fruits and vegetables and stuff over there, because this is a completely separated system. Anyway, those are the 4 basic ways to set up your aquaponic systems. There's some nuances once you get over to the hydroponics and exactly how you're gonna plumb the hydroponic part, the grow beds, the NFTs, those things, but they're still gotta be where they're located in this chain, no matter what, and they always have to flow back to the hydroponics or back to their sump tank. That's basically how these things are plumbed. Enjoy the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got something out of this, like, share, and subscribe. Please make comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Have a great night.